the pod father, the crypto genius.
No, I wouldn't say genius. I mean, there's something to be said for buying and holding. And I bought in 2021, and I held for the last 2 years, and it's paying off now.
It's been painful. It's been painful
for you.
All right,
it's been painful.
It's been painful to hold and just watch it go down all the time, and you just wonder,
it has,
you know. But you just gotta. It's like
diamond
Limp
hands.
Bizkit. You just gotta have faith. Gotta have faith. Did you ever hear that when they redid the what's that guy's name?
George Michael,
yeah, and Limp Bizkit.
One of the greatest songwriters in the history of music, by the way.
And then it took Limp Bizkit to come around and make George Michael's famous.
Oh, God.
John Miller, Chris Williams. From the Channel Seed Studios, it's Miller & Williams. Presented by Wild Rose Casino and Hotel. 3 locations in Iowa. 3 times the fun. You'd rather be here. This is Iowa Everywhere.
I can unequivocally say that I would rather be there at the blackjack table, Wild Rose Casino in Jefferson with John Miller. Hey, just a couple guys sitting around playing cards, enjoying the holiday season.
That's all we
How
are,
you, my friend?
I'm great, and that's the way the holiday season was meant to be enjoyed. At a casino, playing cards, not rolling into the Iowa State House, lopping off the dome of pretend Satan. That's not the way it was meant to be. It's meant to be dealing blackjack at the casino.
That's been a wild week.
Yeah. I mean, for one, I'm just going to say, sorry, Chris, I kind of bulldogged this topic. Last night, Chris sends me a text. Hey, you have any nice Christmas topics to talk about tomorrow? I was drawing a blank for an hour. I'm like, what about my favorite Christmas sporting events? Then I thought of Ed Podolak's Christmas Day game, but I'm like, I didn't even watch that. I just, then I started thinking, was there anything Michael Jordan did on Christmas? I Googled it. Really not. I'm like, I didn't know. So I didn't even reply to you last night. And then this morning, I see this thing about the Iowa, Satan getting decapitated in the Iowa State Capitol. I'm like, hey, how about we talk about this? And you never replied to me. So I just kind of bulldogged that topic.
Because, all right, so here's the deal. I'm recording with you, and then I'm recording another podcast, CW Pod. And the reason being is because I know how much traveling is going on right now. Like, normally I don't like to post weekend podcasts, but
right. So you're thinking over the river,
kids are going to be in the car.
Woods. Let's not talk about Satan. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I was thinking, I was actually going to promote these pods as like, hey, this is like you can listen to this in the car if you're going to grandma's.
Well,
Satan, gotta have faith.
You know what? Should we re-rack it, or can you edit it out and post?
We're good. It is what it is.
You can put a pin in it. But you know what? Here's the deal. You just invite Uncle John into your family truckster for your little trip, and let's have a civics lesson, because everyone could benefit in this country right now from a civics lesson. How do I know this? Because I see what y'all are doing and saying. And all this is going to be profanity free, at least from my end. So I personally, Chris, would not choose to erect an image of Satan anywhere.
Yeah. It seems in poor taste.
It does. It seems in poor societal taste.
I get what they're doing, the point they're trying to make, but it's very like trollish. It's like the anonymous Twitter troll just swearing at you all the time.
I don't see it that way. I see it differently than you. I understand your sentiment, and I think it's probably shared by a number of people. So, but I do think that this is the exact type of thing that we need to see right now in this country to remind ourselves of why doing something like this, lopping the head off of the fake Satan's head, is a bad deal. It's a sign of concern. There is a separation of church and state. Now, this is not a founder's issue, because this is a states' rights issue. And if you look at the state of Iowa's constitution on matters of religion and state, let me read it for you. Sounds a lot like the First Amendment in the United States Constitution. This is Iowa's. The General Assembly shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, nor shall any person be compelled to attend any place of worship, pay tithes, taxes, or other rates for buildings or repairing places of worship or the maintenance of any minister or ministry. Straightforward. It's just like the Establishment Clause in the United States Constitution. And what's concerning to me, again, I wouldn't choose to put up an altar for Satan. I'm not down with Satan.
It's a weird deal.
Perhaps
I'm just not as, I don't know a lot about like the images of Satan. I didn't know he was a donkey or whatever that thing was.
How is this? Is that like someone went on the record and said he's a donkey, or you just saw that thing and it's like, well,
no, I saw that. I guess what I'm saying is I had never in my life like Googled like Satanism. Like I've never thought about it.
Right. You didn't grow up in the 80s. That's why.
Read Revelations. Right. Like that, in those like whatever comes from that book into your head is kind of what's there. I've always thought of he's red skin and he's got horns and the character Satan.
Like Hellboy.
Yeah. It was interesting. I had never thought about it until this whole Iowa House thing happened, or this Capitol thing happened this week.
Well, yeah, the depiction of Satan, if you pull it from the Bible, that's I guess what you're talking about is. I don't believe Satan's real. I believe it's all mythology. I believe it's all a method of control. But you know what? Not going to traumatize the little kids there with the earmuffs. So we'll stop it right there.
I wanted to talk about 90s sitcoms.
Here's the thing. I'll end
Paul Chryst.
It's important because those of you who profess there are people who profess to be patriots, who profess to have a strong inclination of supporting law and order. And when a aspiring politician from Mississippi makes a premeditated conscious decision that he's going to drive up to the state of Iowa, go into the state house, tear this down, knowing that he's probably going to be detained, there's going to be costs, there's going to be legal fees, there could be court, et cetera, et cetera. But he's made the decision because he knows he can rely on a certain segment of society to pay his bills for him. It's called the grift. That's the concern.
I get it.
Premeditated unlawfulness because he believes that a religious group of donors will bail him out. That should be a concern to every American. And frankly, if you are someone who was cheering on the decapitation of pretend Satan, think about it this way. The rabbit always gets the gun. For every Mike Gronstall that you loathe and Kim Reynolds that some of you love, there's going to be another Gronstall. Then there's going to be another Reynolds.
That's the problem I just see in our society is just that whatever side, left or right, like the more radical one side is, then it makes the other side more radical.
It does. It's a negative feedback loop. We are in it. And if you are for theocratic authoritarian creep, all right, no problem. If you're against it, then this should be concerning to you. And I am not saying that all people who profess Christian faith are for this. Anybody that also is a fan of the First Amendment and a separation of church and state, they should be concerned by this because it's very concerning when these type of actions, if they don't go punished, if there's a circumvention of the law and order because enough people donated to pay the fine I'm going to have and all that, that just sets up the next premeditated political stunt. And they'll continue to get worse.
I'm a big middle 80% guy.
I wish the middle was 80%. I think the middle right now is more
it
like
used
20%.
To be. What do you think it is now?
I mean, I think that
60?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would.
Oh,
I guess it depends on how you define the middle. I think you've got probably 25% on each side that
might
be
fair
on
now.
the more extreme outliers.
The problem I always run into is the like far left. They think that I'm like a huge righty, and then the far right, they all think I'm a huge lefty. So
That's great. That's right where you want to be.
Yeah, no, it probably. I guess my point though is I think a lot of these people think they're in the middle and they're really not.
Correct. It's sociological. It's psychology. Everyone thinks that their centered self-opinion, their opinion on things, is normal. No one thinks my opinions are abnormal because then I would be abnormal. Nobody thinks like this. We all think that what we view, our views of the world, that's our homeostasis, that's normal. And that is the prism we look through to measure everything else, which is silly. I recognize that my views on some things are probably more extreme than the majority of the people. And I'm okay with that. I'm not under any delusions that my outlook on all things in the world are normal.
He is John Miller. My name is Chris Williams. I hope that
That's a hard segue right there.
I hope that y'all made those cookies and are taking them to grandma's. I hope the the joy of the season is.
And why did somebody chop off his head?
I'm gonna have to take this one out of the holiday travel promo. I was gonna have this whole portfolio of podcasts for people to listen to that aren't really dated for the holiday travel.
The Grinch. Here comes the Grinch.
You're a mean one, Podfather. Gotta have faith.
Never ever heard a Limp Bizkit song.
Oh, shut up.
No.
You've never heard of Limp Bizkit?
I've heard of them. I've never heard a Limp Bizkit song that I could pick out of a lineup of songs.
How they covered.
I know George Michael. Bro's one of the greatest songwriters of all time.
I mean,
doesn't get
until Fred Durst came around, but it's another topic.
There are some people that believe that, apparently.
Yeah, I'm
just
not.
Like
I'm totally just screwing with you.
Okay.
I did want to talk about is Paul Chryst a good hire? Like that,
well,
I can make two really strong arguments either way. I think, like a professional opinion man should be able to do. I mean,
sure.
I think I could convince our audience that it's a phenomenal hire, and I think I could make everybody just barf at it as well. If it comes to
you're not going to like my answer. I don't think there is a category of phenomenal hire for the Iowa offensive coordinator as long as Kirk Ferentz continues to be Kirk Ferentz as it relates to the offense. If Kirk is willing to allow an offensive coordinator some latitude, and I'm not talking crazy run and shoot and gun and whatever. I'm not talking about that latitude. Air raid, yeah, I'm not talking about air raid. But he didn't do it for his own son, and it cost his own son his job. And I think Kirk's acting a little bit like the world's out to get him. And dude, yeah. You did it to yourself. So I don't know that there is a quote unquote good hire for the offensive coordinator now, because I know that kind of would defeat the purpose. But let's assume that there was. I think Paul Chryst is probably pretty close to a really good thing. Iowa employed more gap, more power O, less reliance on outside zone this year than any year I can remember in the Ferentz era. Paul Chryst's approach at Wisconsin, very much a gap scheme, very little outside zone. And Wisconsin was really, really good at their run blocking principles. So I think that Paul Chryst, yes, Paul Chryst would be my choice right now.
Okay. Because you cannot, like, in any circumstance, hire that Budemeyer guy.
No. Gosh, no. If
I were an Iowa fan, that would be canceling my season tickets, giving up. I would, if I were an Iowa fan and they hired that guy, and the volunteer guy who brings in Deacon Hill, like that is nothing more than that's lower than Brian Ferentz. I'd rather have Brian Ferentz back than this guy.
To me, it's not nepotism because Kirk and Budmeyer don't share DNA that I'm aware of, but to me, it would be an even bigger FU because Budmeyer has no voice in that building.
That's what I mean.
No authority. He will do exactly everything Kirk tells him to do. I'm not saying somebody else is going to go rogue and start going run and shoot. I'm just saying that there will be no pushback. Any good leader needs to allow his support, his staff, the permission to tell him, no, this is a bad idea. And if you are a leader and you do not allow your people to use their voice because you hired them for a reason, because you saw some talent, you saw some ability, you saw something in them, and you should empower them. So if I don't want to see a John Budmeyer who's going to be too scared and pissing his pants to tell Kirk that he thinks that's wrong. Paul Chryst, 58 years old. I know how it is. You get your 50s, you're going to speak up. Paul Chryst has plenty of money.
The only thing I worry about with Chryst would be what I witnessed between Paul Rhodes and Mark Mangino.
Well, I would say I understand that, but the standing of Paul Rhodes and Kirk Ferentz
on
different mountain ranges here. Yeah, I'm not concerned about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my bigger deal is that would Chryst just, I don't know. It's a weird deal because, like, let me make the bad hire argument. And for what it's worth, I tend to lean with you, okay? But just for the sake of conversation, let me make this argument that you're going, like, we're heading to this new age of the Big Ten. The West is gone. Hey, if you're Iowa, the West was won. Congratulations. But so what are we going to do? We've got this opportunity. We can, really move our offense forward. Let's get ready for this new era. And we're going to bring in the guy that got fired at the program that we used to play those infamous 9-6 games with to come and lead our offense. I just don't know. I mean, hey, if you can promise me, John, then in this new era, Iowa's defense is going to stay top 5 in the country for the next 5 years, then this is a great hire. But I just don't see Paul Chryst getting them like, oh, we're top 75 offense now. Do you? Like, I just don't think his scheme's good enough.
I think, and this is, I think if you listen to this week's Legends and Listeners podcast that Scott Docterman and Chad Leistico put out, I haven't listened to it all yet, but thanks to the Iowa Everywhere Twitter feed, I was able to watch some snippets of a couple of them. And one of the snippets that they put out was a conversation about Paul Chryst. So you should all be able to find it in the Iowa Everywhere Twitter feed. And in that little 2 to 3 minute segment, they talked about Paul Chryst, that I think it was in 2020, he turned the offensive coordinating duties over to somebody else. And there was kind of a drop in production, if you will. But prior to that, when Paul Chryst was the OC, Wisconsin's offenses were regularly in the top 40, okay. Total offense.
Yeah.
Now, that said, I would not expect a replication of that at Iowa, and Iowa does not need it. 75 to 99 to use half.
Oh, you're really good.
I think that they'll do that. And if you're 75th to 99th with the same defense that you're packing, your floor is probably 8.5, 9 games.
Yeah.
8 games.
Even in the new Big Ten.
Even in the new Big Ten. Correct.
Yeah.
In the old Big Ten, I'd have bumped it up to 9 or 10.
Yeah.
I agree. But in the new Big Ten, I still think it's 8 as a floor if your offense can consistently do that. In years where your offense is, you're catching some lightning in a bottle and you're, say, top 50 to 74, you're cooking with gas, bro. That's your shot to actually play in another Big Ten championship game before we all die. I mean, some of y'all, well, probably not many of y'all left among us, but there are some people that remembered the Iowa's last trip to the Rose Bowl in like the early 1960s, or was it late 50s? I can't recall. And then there wasn't another one for, 20 some years. And then there was that trip in the 80s and then 90s. But then from 1990, was it 1990? Yeah, 1990 Rose Bowl or 1991 Rose Bowl off the 1990 season. Iowa didn't go to another Rose Bowl until 2016. So, and that's what I think this making it to the new Big Ten championship game is going to be like that hill for Iowa and most everyone in the Big Ten that's not named Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, USC, Washington, Oregon. So, yeah, I think Chryst would be a solid end of Kirk Ferentz era hire. Yes.
Is he angling for the job?
I don't know that. I know that they have a very amicable relationship. I would be shocked if there haven't been conversations. The fact that I would just
to replace Ferentz.
Oh, to replace Ferentz? I guess it's possible. I mean, if he came in for and Kirk stuck around for 3 years and the offense got turned around, then Iowa's going, 9-10 wins a season in this new Big Ten. I tell you what, and Paul Chryst then is like 60-61. He'd get a look. I would still like to see LeVar Woods, put in a position where he is absolutely groomed for the head coaching position.
Look at us. We're already naming Paul Chryst the next head coach at Iowa.
Well, you got a mouse in your pocket when you use the term weak, as I did not say that. But yeah, I mean, it's possible. It's possible, but I would like to see LeVar Woods be groomed for that position.
Okay. There you go. Miller on Paul Chryst. I always thought that those Chryst teams were just a little bit fraudulent. Like the analytics hated him, but I'm with you though.
Chris, you raise a good point. Let's circle back around. I didn't think until you said the word fraudulent, something jogged in my head. And what jogged in my head when you said fraudulent, instantly there was a light in my head that flashed. Big Ten West.
Yeah, I
Big
mean,
Ten West. The same stuff that we're saying about Iowa that we all pretty much agree on, that if it weren't for Iowa being in the Big Ten West, probably aren't winning 29 games over 3 seasons.
Now their defense proved a lot, I thought, in the Big Ten championship game. Not that Iowa's defense really had anything to prove, right? Like they've been phenomenal for years now. But you do wonder, like, okay, well, we're gonna replace Minnesota with Oregon here, and we're going to replace Northwestern with Washington every once in a while. And that's why I said when I framed it that way, can they stay statistically where they have been? Because if they can, man, you're setting yourself up well with a guy like Chryst. But if they can't, if there's going to be this drop, then I think you may need to be a little bit more radical with the OC. But who knows?
Right.
It's all hypothetical. Yeah. And frankly, we all know the answers to all this because as long as Kirk Ferentz is the head coach, we pretty much know what this thing's going to look like.
Right. But who he hires, even if it's going to look mostly the same, will be a big indication of whether or not I get all that interested or excited in the future. Because if it's Paul Chryst, I'm like, oh, Kirk just hired someone who probably would be willing to tell him no from time to time. But if it's John Budmeyer,
they can't hire that guy.
It feels like we're talking about we're getting worked up over something that, like, I don't think that's likely. Do you?
I don't know, man. I mean, I heard that it was Chryst or him.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, you're more connected there than I am, but that's.
Honestly, I this week I would say no. It's been pretty hectic elsewhere, but yeah, I mean. Another
Holgerson's out there.
Yeah, he is. bring the native son home. I think that why can't I remember the Iowa's offensive lineman coach that went to Wyoming?
Yeah.
That I can't remember his name. Yeah. I
would like him. He's a good coach. Look his name up.
I mean,
when me and Hassel went through this after Brian got fired, he was the guy who I said I think I liked the most.
Tim Polachek.
Yeah,
he was really popular amongst the offensive linemen. I know that for sure.
But he's also kind of a Ferentz honky, right? Like he'll just do whatever Kirk will say.
Well, I think that there would be a little more control there, but not quite the Budmeyer level because Polachek has his own voice. Or Polachek.
This Budmeyer guy, like didn't even have a job. Like Kirk just said, "Hey, come on,
Right.
hang out. Bring in
Yeah.
Deacon Hill, and
Yeah.
we're gonna pay your way."
I don't think it will be Bud Meyer, but if it is, that should send up smoke alarms to the Iowa fan base. Like, oh boy, there is not going to be much change at all. Because I still think that Kirk believes that there isn't really a need for change, and this year's foibles were entirely due to quarterback getting hurt in August before he even played a snap, and then losing tight ends. And you know what? That if those things hadn't happened, Iowa probably is 11-1 instead of 10-2. And
If you give
they're not
Yeah.
a national laughing stock and punchline, which to
and Brian
me
Ferentz is
that
still
was
the OC.
probably that to me that's the biggest damage. That like there's like all these kids that are in high school right now that watch ESPN Game Day, that consume all these shows rapidly because they got nothing else to do in addition to working out. All they heard for a whole year was Iowa as a punchline for offense.
2 years.
That's like that's like 5 or 6 or 7 years worth of kids until they all get through out of that cycle. That they're some of these kids that aren't from Iowa in the Midwest, their knowledge of Iowa football is, oh, they got a crappy offense, horrible offense. And I'm a wide receiver. I'm not going there. Well, I've had that problem for a bit anyway. So being a punchline is not what you want.
Would you rather? Let me ask you this: would you rather have gone 11-1 in that scenario, where you're still probably not that good offensively, but I mean, it's not like they were humming, and there's no change, or you go 9-3? They get shut out, but it was a respectable Big Ten championship game. I didn't feel like Iowa really had any reason to be humiliated or anything after that one. And Kirk hires Paul Chryst. Would you rather take the 11-1 with Brian Ferentz next year, or 9-3 with Paul Chryst?
Dude, to me, that is a phenomenal question, because I'm like, I instantly don't know the answer. The emotional human side of me, you know what wants to see a healthy Cade McNamara for Cade's best life, healthy Eric All and Luke Lachey, and Brian Ferentz getting an opportunity to show us what he can do, and not lose his job. Because I also remember Iowa's offense in 2019 when Brian Ferentz was the offensive coordinator. Nate Stanley was the quarterback. I watched what they did to USC in that Holiday Bowl. And so I saw signs of life, obviously, in 2017 against Ohio State, till they laid that horrible egg the next week against Wisconsin. So I would choose a full healthy complement and let those cards go and see what happens next year.
I would say give Paul Chryst, Cade McNamara, those tight ends, because I still don't think Iowa's receivers were that bad early on. I just think the scheme sucked so bad that it just got in their head so terribly. Everybody's. If you give Chryst that whole group, they could be pretty good. Really, like
they'd be a lot better, better than what we saw.
I'm not convinced too, like that we all should. I think we all should learn that, like, just relying on Cade McNamara next year kind of feels like a problem as well, because he's so injury prone. Like we learned this last summer, right? Like they almost, but they got Deacon, I guess, coming back. He's played, but man,
I mean, if it's not like Marco Linez is number 2 out of the spring,
but him.
But you're right. I mean, give me Marco Linez sight unseen over what I saw from Deacon. Deacon's just not a Power 5 quarterback. But the Cade one thing about Cade McNamara next year, even if he is 100% healthy for the whole season, he's not gonna move the chains with his feet really ever. And I just don't feel like in today's world of college football, Power 5 college football, that you need to have a quarterback who can move the chains with his feet from time to time. Iowa doesn't have that. Iowa hasn't had that since Beathard. Before Beathard, it was Tate. Before Tate, it was Banks. Before Banks, it was probably Pete Gale in 1980 or 1981. They just don't do that. Yeah. He and Gordy Bohannon were the quarterbacks for Iowa's 81 Rose Bowl.
Hey, I didn't realize this, and this is probably my fault because I know he's been there for a while now. I didn't realize our guy Danon Hughes was the color guy for the Chiefs. Where have I been?
Oh man, yeah. Danon is invited into my household every weekend. I love listening to the radio call.
I don't care for Holstis because it's probably the fact that I'm a Vikings fan, so I just never listen. I don't like, not as a human. I don't need to. I don't. If it's not Paul Allen,
he and Paul Allen are twins. They might as well be twins.
And I'm a Vikings fan, so if it's not Paul Allen, I'm not listening to the Homer radio. That's just so. Anyways,
right.
I'm driving around and I have satellite radio now. Came with my new vehicle. Anyways, I'm flipping around and I'm listening to this Chiefs Bills game the other day, and Danon Hughes was on there, and he was the first Hawkeye I ever remember. Actually, I'll take that back. Nick Bell was, but I was too young then to really like look at the TV and go, that's Nick Bell. I was too young. Danon Hughes was the first Hawkeye that I really remember like loving. Yeah.
This guy also played baseball for Iowa, and he did some color
Danon Hughes did?
during the Big Ten baseball tournament.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
I went down a rabbit hole last night too because I saw like Kenya Murray flash across my screen for some reason, and I went back on a bunch of all those old Davis teams, and we're looking at the stats like him and Monteer Glasper and like all those old school dudes. Man,
Monteer
the
Glasper.
glory years.
Wow.
The glory years. Iowa basketball in like the early 90s. It was the biggest. It was I truly believe Iowa basketball in that era was the biggest sport in our state.
Certainly the mid 80s, the late 80s. I mean,
let me make the argument because I was there for football too, and I was but football you couldn't watch the games all the time. Like you had to listen to Z.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And in the wintertime, every Iowa men's basketball game was on Raycom. And everybody watched it because there's nothing else to do in the middle of winter in Iowa. I would guess, honestly, like that there in that era, Iowa men's basketball was bigger than football. Clearly not drawing as many fans. I'm not making that argument. But as far as viewership and people like just being locked into it, it was just easier to follow because of the Raycom thing.
That is true. That's a really good point. And Iowa basketball was a pretty big deal statewide. And yeah, I still think that, football probably always moves the needle more, but I think your point relative to the access of games, a lot of eyeballs were on Iowa basketball. And that was the only reason. It was a fun time.
Because that's the only reason I was so into it is because it didn't matter if they were playing UC Irvine or Duke. Like our family, we were sitting around the TV. We had a calendar. We knew when the Hawks were playing. All right, Larry Morgan, baby, let's go.
Ain't going to be Cosby show tonight. It's the Hawks.
Hell no. And then that Raycom, I give anything to have the thing flash across the screen right now.
I bet I can find that for you.
Hey, we're going to have a producer starting in January.
We are?
Yeah.
So we're going to get a little more run?
Yep.
Oh, that's great. That's
intern
fantastic.
Aiden, no longer the intern, coming in January.
Need to show him the appropriate level of respect. And how is Aiden on the blackjack table?
He's stands behind you and collects chips. He is a fine young man. I genuinely worry about him hanging out with me and you and debaucherous activities. Yeah, he's a really good kid. And he did do Circa with me and Hassel and Ted Flint, so he's seen a few things, but
he's been exposed to a few things. I was gonna make another joke, but since this is a Christmas special and we're trying to remain in the spirit of Christmas, I'm gonna keep that one to myself.
Yeah, you've already ruined it, so you can say what you led the Christmas episode with Satan's head getting lopped off at the Iowa Capitol.
I know it was a civics lesson, and frankly, to everyone listening with children in the car, you are welcome.
again, I can prove the text message I sent last night at like 8:00. I said, "Hey John, I've been watching a lot of 90s sitcoms with my daughter. Maybe we can talk about this and look back at these on the show tomorrow." Crickets, no response. This morning, "Hey, did you see Satan's head got cut off at the state capitol?" For those listening on the podcast and not watching on YouTube, John is showing the text message right there.
Yeah. So you can forward to 35 minutes and 37 seconds to see that if you want to go catch that. So Chris made every attempt. I didn't have any. I just didn't have anything for you until this morning. That I had.
I did. Just to wrap things up. You have an appointment. I had I was at the Channel Seed holiday party, like for their customers over this week. It was great. So these guys it's all the ag world and how they listen to podcasts now is incredible. I mean, 60-year-old men are in their combines listening to podcasts now. Like it is
them.
really a
that'd be great
medium that is taking over in that industry. I had so many farmers come up and be like, "Yeah, I don't think that John Miller would quite fit in here." Not in a bad way. They didn't dislike you. It was funny. They said the same thing about Hassel. They're like, "Yeah, I don't quite think he'd fit in here."
I totally get it. I think they're wrong about me.
Well, you can bullshit with anybody. Yeah. You would be way better there than Hassel would.
I grew up in a small little farm town. All my friends were farmers. My dad worked for the entirety of my life within FS and Growmark. I sell things to ag related folks on a daily basis, energy. So I can speak the language. Now, granted, I may have a few different views now than I had back then, and
it's okay.
But
we're all different.
It's okay. I'd get along just fine at the Christmas party. Now, as to whether or not they like me when I leave, that's fine. That's okay.
They'd
now,
like
Hassel,
you.
That would be funny.
They would like you a lot more than they like Hassel.
We can agree on that. To the degree they'd like me, we have no idea, but we can agree on that.
Hassel would show up with his nicely pressed collared shirt.
Hassel has turned into
in the air. They'd be like, "Hey, drink this Busch Light." He'll be like, "Do you have any Heineken?"
Yes, he's turned into an elitist. Totally an East Coast elitist.
Do you? What are your plans for the holidays, real quick? Are you staying in Kansas City?
Well, I was going to drive up to Iowa today, but my folks have COVID, so that's not happening.
The vid.
That's
still a thing.
We're just apparently. Well, it's a thing, like, because next week I'm going to be around like people that are 90 years old.
I think I had it like a couple weeks ago. I'm pretty sure I had it because everybody's getting the pink eye with it. Do your mom and dad have pink eye? It's like a sign of COVID now.
Didn't ask him that. So you think you're pretty certain that you had COVID, right? But you didn't test yourself. Didn't test yourself.
No, I went to the doctor. I did test myself, but the problem is a lot of these home tests don't work now because the strains keep changing.
Good point.
So it's kind of like, if you're going to be around 90-year-olds, it's best to. But the other, I just think that there's people walking around with it everywhere now, and like they just don't know.
Well, there's no doubt, and we test whenever we feel those symptoms, and we know we're going to be around people.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's not like we're super concerned about it for our own well-being. It's just more looking out for the others in society.
The river, into the woods, to grandmother's house we go.
Packing some meat, bringing the heat. COVID all over the flow. No, that didn't work.
The grossest thing ever, and then we're wrapping this up, I swear, is when you read those reports about how they test our shit.
Fecal testing.
Yeah, listen, go to like the
record show that Chris was the only one that used profanity in this one. So
I think that one word is not as bad as you spreading the word of Satan for about 10 minutes earlier.
didn't praise Satan in any way, shape, or form.
Get the hell out of here.
But yes, they test the stool.
Yeah, they go in
at
this.
the,
They take a
intake
huge scoop
department.
of shit, and then they test the acidity of it. Right?
I'm going to let the audience decide what's worse, the topic we began with or the topic we ended with.
I told
This
you
is
it's
a
disgusting.
loaf of bread with two heels that are foul. The middle, I think, is better, but the heels were not good. The heels were
The
not
heels
good.
have mold all over them. The middle, you may be able to get away with it. Although we did talk about Iowa's offense for the majority of it, so it's likely just as rank.
This podcast looks like Satan, smells like shit.
He is John Miller. My name is Chris Williams. Happy holidays, everybody.